talking. It's all about how do we collaborate to compete in that sense. Well, we got a very interesting session coming, so I'm going to kind of make these interruptions as short and efficient as possible. One or two things to say. Jackie Joyner said, look, it's better to look ahead and prepare than to look back and regret. We have Amitabh, and believe it or not, Amitabh is a fiction writer. Amitabh was trained in fiction writing in the US, and his pastime is actually working for BCG, I'm told. Someone seems to be paying him for writing fiction, and he seems to be making a difference in that sense. Another interesting thing that Amitabh does is that he is predicting a 10 trillion opportunity between India and China. He believes in that. He believes that. He has the passion, he has the commitment, and he says, look, I expect this from our country, from the clients, and from all of us around the table to actually make the $10 trillion opportunity happen. May I please request Amitabh? Thank you.
Better? Yeah. Okay, excellent, very good. So while, I'm actually a very technology unfriendly guy, but today I've decided to, try a couple of new pieces of technology. So while we are getting that set up, a very quick introduction, and, Ganesh has been very kind to talk about, a couple of things that I do. But, yes, I do write fiction, not in my day job, just to be clear. Make sure in case there was any confusion on that accord. So what I do for a living, like all of you here, is work in the consulting space. Been with BCG for over a decade now. Work primarily in the consumer and retail space now. But in the past, I have worked in pretty much every sector that BCG operates in. Have spent most of my career in India, but got an opportunity to work in our New York office for 4 years in between. So I have had the opportunity to look at consulting in different geographies in different sectors. So. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm sure all of you here have enough experience in consulting to know what it is all about. What I'm here to talk about, is the $10 trillion opportunity as was put earlier. Before I actually get into the opportunity itself, let's actually see whether the technology bit works. Now, the reason why I wanted to do the whole technology bit was, so about a month and a half back, I had a call with John, and Walter was also actually on the call, and I was, I've never presented to a group of consultants. So I was like, so what am I supposed to do? Because I can't talk about very proprietary BCG stuff. At the same time, what is in public domain is going to be the most obvious thing in the world for consultants. That's what they live and deal with all the time. So I thought, why don't I start, instead of just talking, why don't I start, and in the spirit of being interactive, start with a set of questions. And what we'll do is, if you can hand out, we've actually got voting pads. So we'll hand out, I'm not sure whether we'll have one for everyone, but we'll hand out, and if some of you don't mind sharing, between maybe a couple of people. I'll ask a set of questions, would love to have your answers to some, what I think are very pressing questions that we have. First, let me make sure that either everyone has one or their neighbor has one. Let's give it a minute. There's actually a couple here. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm hoping everyone has one now. So the first question, and this is like, if some, maybe going back to business school days for some of you. What will be the growth rate of India, Indian GDP, over the next 5 years, in a 5-year horizon? I gave some thought to where I put the cutoffs, that this was actually a safe set of cutoffs to have. So, 8% or higher, 7 to 8%, 6 to 7, lower than 6, and like all consultants like to answer, depends. So you are welcome to choose that option if you have to. So all you have to do is in your voting buttons, there are numbers in the pad. So between 1 to 5, you can pick whichever one you think is the number that you would like to vote for. It tells me we have 27 responses, so we'll give it another maybe few seconds. It'll only record it once. You can try. You can't rig this one. Many things that can be rigged in this country, not this one. 41. I think we have 49 pads out there, so maybe a few others. Okay, we'll go with 40. Let's see. So 6 to 7 is the most common vote. And again, this is, remember, the question was, in case some of you were not paying attention, next 5 years. It's not about next year, next 5 years. So while there's a fair number of people about, I guess, more than 50% believe it's going to be 7 or higher, about 40 or so believe it is going to be lower. So interesting to see what because in some ways, why these questions I think are very relevant is this group actually has the best, in some ways, one of the best pulses of the country. All of you interact with policymakers, you interact with corporations, you interact with people in India, you interact with people who are coming into India. So in that spirit, the next question. Fiscal deficit next year. And I specifically asked the question, and I thought of the question yesterday when reading a newspaper article from, so that, not to bias you, but Mr. Chidambaram says he will control it to 5.6%. As a finance minister, he should know. But we also know that India has a history of missing these targets for many years in a row. So tighter bands here. I'd love to see what people believe. Okay, so 42, the magic number 42. So let's, on that one, one more. So most people believe in Mr. Chidambaram. They actually do believe that he'll, and my guess is that you believe when the band says 5.5 to 6, you actually believe it will be more like 5.9 probably. But the band is large enough for you to believe. So on the first one, I think what I would define the mood of this room is cautiously optimistic. Half the people believe above 7%. The rest also don't feel it will be terrible. 6 to 7 is what people are looking at. This says also that, maybe we will hopefully learn how to manage our budgets as a country.
By the way, in America, that would be considered very optimistic.
It's a great point, John, and we'll reflect on that as we go about the cultural differences in many ways between, what you see in India and China versus other parts of the world. So the final question, very, very immediate. So we started with a 5-year view, then we looked at the next year, and now next month, or actually end of this month. I believe the monetary, the RBI, the relevant committee meets on 29th of January. There's been, for the last, I guess, several such meetings, there's been a lot of buzz about will they cut the rates, will they not cut the rates. They've held back so far, partly because of fiscal deficit. So the question is yes, no, or, just can't tell. Let's wait for the meeting to happen. It's only, 10 days away. We've crossed the magic number of 40, so. Interesting. This is probably the most split view, I guess, with some people just holding back their, being good consultants and, kind of just waiting for it to happen. But I guess almost even Stevens when it comes to will it not. Now, the mood that I'm sensing from the room is very much, John, as I said, cautiously optimistic. Yes, it may happen. Will the most immediate things happen or not? We're not sure. But if you remember the questions in the order, the first question was actually the longest term, and we've gotten to very, very specific. As we get closer to more specific, more near term, I am sensing a little more hesitation, a little more holding back. But in the longer term, people do believe that there is an opportunity. Let me actually, use this to make almost a self-critical comment about us consultants. We actually spend too much time with all this. We spend too much time on here and now, too much time on what's going to happen in the next year, well, with our clients, the next quarter of the next year. Sometimes when we are helping them build their strategy and roadmap for the next 5 years, maybe that's pretty much the time horizon that one ends up spending time on. Let me actually tell you a story. A story which begins with, this is my son. This is actually a slightly older picture. He's 3 years old now. He loves, like all little children of his age, he actually likes listening to stories. One of his most favorite stories that I tell him is, about actually, my childhood stories are the ones he enjoys the most because I don't think he can imagine me as a child, but he likes to hear what is it that I did as a child because he wants to do all the same things. His favorite story is about a trip that I actually made many years ago as a child to this small village in Rajasthan, which you see on the map there, called Deshnok. It's very close to Bikaner. It's, it's about 5-6 hours drive from Jaipur, which is the nearest airport. It's my ancestral village. About maybe 300 years ago, my ancestors actually used to live there, and then they migrated to West Bengal, and I, of course, now live in Bombay now. So he likes the story not because he reads Google Maps, because he likes the characters in the story. And what happens. What happens, one integral part of the story is actually the trip itself. For him, actually, the destination is more difficult to imagine, but the trip, it's very dusty. I tell him about driving through very dusty, bumpy roads. Did I switch something on? Oh, sorry, I'm fine. I tell him about the dusty, bumpy roads. I tell him about by the time you get to the end of the journey, you're covered with a layer of soot and all that. One of his favorite characters in the story is actually this. Does anyone know which vehicle this is? Excellent. It's a Jonga. It's actually, I was reading about it after, when I put up the picture. It was commissioned, it's actually of Japanese origin. And it was brought into India by Nissan, actually brought by the Indian Army into the country. It's an SUV, a four-wheel drive, and something that was made in Jabalpur. In fact, Jonga stands for Jabalpur Ordnance Gun Carriage. That's actually, this is a short form of that. It's a very, for those of you who've actually been in one of these, it's a very robust kind of a vehicle, can deal with the kind of roads that you saw in the previous picture. And why he likes it, I think all little boys love anything that moves, from cars to aeroplanes to helicopters. He just likes when I describe the throb of a Jonga, when I tell him how, every bone in my body rattled when I went on those dusty roads, and the smell of diesel when we were driving through. So he likes, to hear about all of that. I also tell him about, stopping by on the road. All little kids, like to hear about chocolates that their parents gave them. I remember actually stopping by it not just once, but many times for refreshments, little chocolates. And this is a picture of what a shop, and this of course is from Google, but what I imagine and what I remember a shop from those days would be like. Relatively sparse, 5-star being pretty much the only thing that would have been available. And most likely if it was Rajasthan and this was the summer, molten completely out of shape, where I could not recognize the 5-star if it was given to me, outside the wrapper, sometimes even spilling out into the wrapper. And then the final destination. This is actually a temple in my ancestral village where, we go back quite regularly. And so those of you who actually know of this, it's actually famous for rats. Karni Devi temple, exactly. So it's actually, and this is the favorite part of the story for him, where I described to him a temple where rats are holy. So you can't kill them, you can't hurt them. And if you walk, they're actually running all over your feet. They're trying to climb up, on you. So for him, it's a very, very, for those of you who can remember how you were when you were 3 years old, you can imagine this is quite a bit of an experience to talk about that. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because, about 2 weeks back, I actually had the wonderful opportunity of recreating that entire trip with my son. So his first trip, and mine after almost 10 years. And we actually did the whole trip, and it's not easy to get from Bombay to this place. But we did the trip. And I was, like with many of us, was almost stuck in the past. I was imagining the same dusty roads, the bumpy roads, the Jonga and so on and so forth. But this is what I got. Roads were actually pretty good. Metal roads. I was not expecting this. I did not ride in a Jonga, much to my, he was actually disappointed. And I could not lie to him and say, this is a Jonga. This is actually a Chevrolet Tavera, which was a very comfortable car, air-conditioned and on good roads. So very, very different experience. When I stopped at a shop to get him chocolates, I actually did not have, I had too many options. Pretty much everything that I could have bought, I can buy from him in Bombay was available for me to buy for him in in this roadside shop in the middle of nowhere, really. There was nothing else over there. This is actually a real picture, not from Google, because this was literally 2 weeks back. Fortunately, what had not changed was the Karni Mata temple, and he had a great time with the rats. He was a little afraid in the beginning, but then eventually he had a good time. Now, just before you guys wonder what am I trying to do here, I feel as consultants, we spend a lot of time in the here and now. We spend a lot of time worrying about how are we going to help the client meet the numbers for the next quarter, for the next year? What is it that they should be doing for the next 5? While we do all that, sometimes it's actually helpful to just sit back and look at what I would call relatively profound changes that are happening in this country. I personally, I guess, don't do it enough. So for me, this trip was actually an eye-opener, because I remembered the sights, the sounds, and the smells of my trip. Last was 10 years ago, and then I had this trip this time. And I could distinctly see the difference. Fortunately, there are all kinds of consultants, and some people do think a little ahead. And some of my colleagues in BCG have actually written this book called The $10 Trillion Prize, which is about the rise of the affluent customer and about the growth in India and China, as was being referred to by Raj earlier. And it's actually interesting that if you look at the cast of characters who've written this, one American, born and brought up and living in America, that's Michael. An American who's lived for the last 20 years in China. A Chinese origin Chinese person who's a consultant in our China office, a partner in our China office, and one Indian who's lived in the US but has pretty much lived all his life in India. So a good cross-section of people to write the story, so to make sure that it's not just about a view from India, but also how India is perceived abroad. I'm not sure, so I actually don't read nonfiction in general. I write fiction, I like to read fiction. For those of you who have this on your to-do list, and consultants love to-do lists, let me help you strike that off, hopefully. Let me talk to you about what some of the key messages from the book are. Obviously, you're more than welcome to buy the book after that as well. What is the $10 trillion prize all about? And I think it's, before I get into the key messages from the book, maybe important to just, in the spirit of where I started, of not taking a 1-year view or a 2-year view, but taking a longer view of the world, not just of India, but of the world, start with what is the context in which we operate today. If you look at newspaper headlines, pretty much anywhere in the world, John, I'm sure, can attest to the headlines that he would have seen in the Wall Street Journal maybe 3 days ago versus what he sees in India. The general picture is a bit of a gloom and doom. These are actual headlines from different newspapers in the last 12 months or so. And the general worry is that the world is going down the tube. And if you look at some of the numbers, if you look at some of, and all of us consultants love numbers, if you look at what's happening, and if you look at the pressures that we are feeling in our business, you do tend to feel that, okay, maybe this is actually a tough time to be in. There's a lot of press, and this was last year and the year before, about Greece. But one wonders, what is the big deal all about? Greece is 0.2% of the world's population. All people in Greece would fit into Bombay, and there would still be some spare left. If you look at the rest of Southern Europe, also in a lot of trouble, all of it put together are actually 2% of the world's population. But so much press gets dedicated to it that sometimes I feel that even the smartest of us are actually missing the wood for the trees. What is the wood, as I think of it? I believe this is the best time in the period of world history that we are living in. May not always feel that way when we step out and it's cold and raining, like today. May not always feel that way when we have a deadline that we are very close to getting to, and we haven't, the team hasn't put together what they had to. But if you take, just 2 factors. One is peace. And the data here is on the number of people who've died as a result of war, civil war, terrorism. And look at the data of what it has been in the last decade. This is, the last 10 years versus, during World War, in the next 10 decades, there's a dramatic drop. If you look at growth, we all fret and worry when suddenly, the IIP number drops and the GDP forecasts, which pretty much always go wrong, fall from, 7% to 6 to 5.6 and so on and so forth. But if you look at the GDP growth rate in the last 10 years, in spite of the, there was at the early part of the decade, there was the dot-com crisis, 9/11, and then in the later part of the decade, there was the financial industry challenges. In spite of that, we actually grew 10 to 20% faster than the previous decade. And if you compare it to previous decades, and I'm talking about the world economy, the entire world as one system. So why so much gloom and doom? Some of it is because we are caught up in the here and now. And my only, if you were to only take one message away from my, chat today, it is to be positive about where we are and where we believe we can be. That to me is the most important message that I would like to leave you with. And this is, been something that, not something that I think we think all the time, but I fundamentally believe this. At the center of this, what I feel this opportunity or this boom is actually are India and China, two of the most populous countries in the world. And if you look at a simple statistic, and I was wondering how long could I go in a presentation that I'm making to consultants without data. I realized that 10 slides was the upper limit. So just when I'm hitting probably the 10th or 11th, well, actually, sorry, I went to 18 because I think each picture was separate. Anyway, this is a story that has been so far and the story that we expect it to be. And it's so fundamental in many ways that there's not much doubting that this will actually happen. If I deep dive into India specifically, what we are projecting, and the data here is the income pyramid of the country. And one thing that I'm sure all consultants will attest to is how difficult it is to actually get this data. There is no reliable source. So what we've done is we've actually looked at what is available publicly, married it with our proprietary research to put this together. What you see from 2000 to 2010 is a similar picture. The shape of, well, India has become more prosperous, but the shape of the curve doesn't change. What we expect to happen in the next 10 years is this fundamental shape to change from a pyramid to what we would call, let's say, a start of a diamond. China, at the same time, would be exactly like a diamond, where the middle will be, exactly like the middle, like almost symmetrical. The top and bottom will be symmetrical. In India, it's still, top would still be a little smaller. We'll probably take another, few years after that. You guys can still hear me, right? Yeah. So this is, this is the prosperity that is driving, in some ways, the optimism that I'm believing in. This optimism is not mine. This actually, and John, this will be to talking to your point of India versus the US and how different messages are construed. So BCG has been running a survey for the last 10 years on people's sentiments about consumption and about spending and so on and so forth. A couple of questions to point out. First is around 10 years from now, how do you think your earnings would have evolved? India, China, about 80% of the people, between 70 and 80% of the people believe that it will increase or increase substantially. That number for the US is actually 20 points lower. But at least there is some degree of optimism, I would say, even in the US for the next immediate future. The question that I find very interesting is, do you believe that the next generation will lead a better life than the past? And that is where I see a dramatic difference. Where, and this is, we've got this data for 25 countries. India and China just completely stand out, even compared to a Brazil or Russia, stand out in just the optimism in the country. So, in some ways, I think the scores that I saw at the beginning of the presentation is a good indicator, because as consultants, we are a little more skeptical than people in general. So I think that cautious optimism, by the time you reach to the rest of the country, is fairly optimistic. We are talking about close to 80% believing that their children will have a better life than they did. This translates into the essence of the book in many ways. It's a BCG book, so obviously there's a lot of data, a lot of analysis, but it's a little non-BCG in some ways. It's a lot about stories. It's about hopes, it's about dreams, it's about aspirations of common people, people who have had a certain life and aspire to a certain life going forward. And I won't take you through all of the stories. In fact, you're welcome to buy the book if you want to read all the stories. But, I'll talk about one of them, Rakesh Kumar Sahu. In a small, actually not small, in a large town, in Uttar Pradesh. He started about 15 years ago as a street cart vendor selling chaat. all of us have seen and have actually hopefully enjoyed the street food of UP in particular. But that's how he started, and he used to go. He had a cycle as his mode of transport. The cart became a little bigger. It became 2 carts. It became 3 carts. At one point in time, he was actually able to open a restaurant. So today he runs a restaurant. From his cycle, he's actually moved on to he's got a bike and a car. He's got pretty much every consumer durable that you'd expect a middle-class Indian family to have. He's got a couple of mobile phones. He's got a refrigerator, a washing machine, a color television. So a life that that he could not have imagined. Just absolutely could not have imagined 15 years ago when he started out. But today, he's actually somewhere where, and what's most interesting is when we interviewed him, it was less about his wealth or his rise to affluence. His story is about, the way, in his own words, my life is like a rocket. The rockets that we see in Diwali, I think, is what he's alluding to. He believes it's just gone and shot through, and it will continue to go that way. So it's not just about where he was and where he has come to, but it's about where he believes he can go further. That, to me, and stories like this, and there are like countless stories. All of us have our own. Many of us are these stories. I know I am, and this is this entire mass of people, a very large number of people, being as optimistic as they are about future, in my view, is what is underlying what I believe will be the $10 trillion opportunity. Translating that into numbers, since all of you love numbers, an average Indian born in in the recent past versus an average Indian born in the previous generation will actually live 50% longer. Will consume almost 3.5 times on a per capita basis, and just so that there's no trick here. These are constant prices. So there's no inflation built into this. This is actual physical consumption of goods and services, right? And what you get at the end of it is similar Indian in many ways, same country, same culture, and so on and so forth, would consume 20 times more than what you'd consume, what his parents would have consumed. Just so that you know, and as there's always that healthy competition between Indians and Chinese, the same number for China is actually 38 times. So they are a little ahead of the curve on that one, but we are catching up. What does this translate into? The authors of the book have actually projected by category for both the countries, the consumption in 2010 and where the consumption will go in the future. The number for India stacks up to about $3.6 trillion. And the number for China is close to 6. And then, of course, like a good consultant, we've taken a bit of license to round it up to 10, because 9.6 on a book cover would have sounded a little strange. So $10 trillion opportunity, give or take. That's what we are, suggesting is what is there to be captured. And, and as you go through the day, I'm sure there'll be discussions on how to capture it and what are some of the challenges and so on. I just wanted to, give my perspective on what I think some of the hurdles and challenges would be. Because, it's not going to be easy. Why is it not going to be easy? I believe there are 4 reasons. First is just the sheer diversity. India is, more than the fact that it's, we are about 15% or 16% of the world population living in 2% of the world's landmass. So we are a very dense country, as witnessed by just walking on the streets. But more importantly, we are a country which is very, very diverse. And this is just one example. We are diverse in languages, we are diverse in habits, we are diverse in preferences, and probably the place where diversity comes to the fore is food. And instead of one standard rice, there are like at least 10 different, or this is not an exhaustive list. These are actually analytically above a particular threshold, the highest consumed and produced rice by state in each of these states. So just the sheer diversity and getting your, if you're trying to capture that in India's case, the $3.6 trillion opportunity, just trying to capture getting your arms around that complexity is not easy. And this is probably the one place where, companies not originally from India struggle the most till they realize that you need Indian managers to understand and to capture the opportunity. The second, the chart is a little complex. I'll come to that in a second. But the second challenge is, it's in some ways I would say both an opportunity and a challenge, but is what I think Raj was referring to, the paisa vasool mindset. the value consciousness. Having lived in the US for a few years and India, I think it's just the mindset of an average person on how to save and how to make sure that the same products last longer, and how an Indian would almost never throw away a consumer durable that is creating a problem versus keep getting it repaired for like 10 years in a row and make it last. That entire mindset is actually very ingrained in our culture, and it's not something that Western companies understand very easily, because I'm sure it was there 30, 40, 50 years ago in those parts of the world. It's definitely not true right now. And this chart, what this shows is actually a very interesting analysis we had done for a client on what you see on the y-axis is the degree of penetration, household penetration. How many households consume a particular category? The size of the bubble is the size of the category. And the x-axis really is the, is the degree of value play. By value play is defined as what percentage of the market is actually captured by very low-priced offerings in the market. And it's a little intuitive, it's a little obvious. It's great to have data to prove it. You see almost a perfect correlation. For a category to be deeply penetrated in India and to be above a particular threshold size, let's say 1,000 crore being the threshold size, you have to have a very serious value play. A large part of the market has to operate at a very, very, very competitive price offering. And that's, in my view, one of the manifestations of the value consciousness that we have as a country. The third challenge, in my view, is infrastructure. Part of the infrastructure is what we always talk about. And every conference you'd hear people raving and ranting about the poor physical infrastructure. But that's just one part of the story. I think human capital, where we do believe that as 1 billion people, one of our strengths is the demographic dividend and so on. But if you take a slightly short-term view of life, we believe that in the next 5 years, we are actually going to have a shortfall of more than 5 million people. Because while we have people, they're not necessarily skilled to do what we would want them to do. So there is a shortage of human capital in the country today. And then, again, of course, there is the government challenges that, beyond a point, I think we can spend the entire day talking about it. So let's not do that. But there are those challenges which exist. So this is the whole infrastructure in the broader theme, not just physical infrastructure, is something which is a challenge. And finally, uncertainty. And what I've put on the chart there is just one measure of uncertainty. And this is one metric that gets talked about a lot, inflation, particularly in the last year or so, year and a half. But if you actually take a 15-year view of inflation in the country, what bothers me, to be honest, is not the level at which the inflation has been operating of recent past. What bothers me is the fluctuation, is the uncertainty that it drives. And if you think about from, a lot of my clients are manufacturers of consumer products. For them, being able to plan, being able to price, being able to think through how to do their costing in the face of such extensive fluctuations in commodity prices, particularly things like crude, agriculture output, and so on, is a huge challenge. So, part one of what I wanted to talk about, which is very much the essence of the book, is the huge opportunity that we have in this country, in this world. And don't let the newspapers fool you. Don't let the news channels con you into believing that we are living in the worst times of the world. I personally believe, and I would like to believe that with data I've shown that, we are living in one of the best times of the world. India and China in particular have a unique opportunity, very conveniently sized at $10 trillion. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. There are all these challenges. And the last thing I want to do actually here is tell you guys how to solve for the challenges. All of you work on it. You work regularly with clients. So that's the last part of the book, is actually advice for companies who want to do it. I will spare you that part. What I would like to do at the close, I guess, is go back to, if you still have your voting devices and have your fingers ready, I'd like to go back to a few questions. And these are questions that, when I was thinking about this and I was introspecting, what are questions I'd like to ask myself as a consultant? And I'd like to ask myself, and I'd like to give myself very honest answers to make sure that I, as a consultant, am prepared to deal with the opportunity that is prepared. And I'd like to ask all of you and request all of you to answer it as honestly as you can. And the first question is, do you believe in the opportunity? And it's okay to disagree with some of the data that I presented, because I'm sure there's other data that speaks the other way also. And given that we are in a room full of consultants, I have allowed the third option of, the hedging one. Interesting. No, so that was an error. So I would have been shocked if it would have been 33%, split ways. So in some ways, this is a continuation, I guess, of the cautious optimism that we started off with, to say that, look, it's not just about people at large. It's not just about even people in this room who, to be completely transparent with you, I believe we are more skeptical than an average person on the road. But even we believe that this opportunity is real. I'm guessing that you actually see it every day with your clients. The second question of introspection, so to speak, is, do you understand the challenges? And when I say understand the challenges, not really at the level of, yeah, infrastructure is a problem, yeah, government regulations, but do you deeply, truly understand what drives those challenges? Why do those challenges exist? And ask yourself this question, and answer it as honestly as you can. We'll wait for the magic number 40. Okay. That's an error. I would argue this is a fairly honest answer. If I had a voting meter, I would have gone on 3. There are, yes, I'm a speaker here and I speak at other such events as well, I do believe that there are parts of the challenge that I truly, truly understand, but there are some that I just can't fathom. I can't fathom of why they are a challenge, and I can't fathom, how to kind of deal with them. And that's the reality of what we live in. And a part of, in my view, a part of being a successful consultant in this country is being at peace with that degree of uncertainty in your own mind. That it's okay not to know all the answers. As long as you appreciate the question, it's actually, the clients will appreciate that it's in itself. The final question is, so if you believe in the opportunity, if you understand the challenges, do you know what it will take to unlock them? Again, what I think is a fairly honest answer. And this is almost the last thought that I wanted to leave with all of you, because I'm not here to preach and tell you, how to solve the problems for your clients. All of you are where you are because you know how to do that. It is as a fraternity, as Raj put it and Ganesh put it, of consultants, for us to ask ourselves these questions. First is to not to take a short-term view, but to take a longer-term view of life. I know it's not easy, but deliberately to do that. Ask ourselves about the opportunity. Are we convinced? Because if we are not convinced, we cannot convince others. And I think good answer on that one. Do we understand the challenges? No, we did not. And my only advice, if you'd humor me and allow me to give you the advice, is just invest the time and effort to really understand. It's very easy to say, chalta nahi hai, isliye nahi chalta hai, whatever. But why does it not happen? Why does it happen the way it happens? Yes, there are a lot of inefficiencies in the distribution structure in India. It exists for a reason. It works beautifully for companies who've actually invested in that over the last 20, 30 years. And anyone who's coming into India now will struggle. So it's there for a reason. And finally, the last piece of suggestion would be around just continue to invest. And as consulting firms, I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our clients, we owe it to our people to continue to invest in the latest and greatest thinking on how do you unlock this. And not leave it at the level of reports and at the level of thoughts, but actually help specific clients unlock it. And only then will we actually have proof that it can be done. Because to be honest, the $3.6 trillion prize is very seductive. We should actually go and get there. And I think us as a community, I strongly believe, can actually play a very big role for the country to realize its true potential, and for all of us as as individuals to actually contribute towards that. It's as Bruce Henderson, the founder of BCG, quoted another great man before him to say, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I can move the world. And I actually truly believe that we in this room actually have that capability. The last thing that I'll leave you with is, just to, and before I come back to questions, is, the one thought that I started off with. I truly believe in that. There's one message that I'd want to leave you with, is the message of optimism, where 20 years from now, I'm sure, maybe not 20, maybe I'm guessing more like 30, 35 years from now, my son will make the same trip that I did with him, with his son or daughter, and he will take the, I'm assuming, train. I'm sure the roads will be even better. I'm sure the car that he'll ride will be even more comfortable. I'm sure he'll have a lot more options to eat or drink along the way. My sense is the rats will still be there. It's fairly integral to the temple. I don't think they're going anywhere. And they get, by the way, they get fed a lot, so they're quite comfortable. I truly believe that my son will live in a better India than I have. I'd like all of us to believe that, and I'd like all of us to play a role in making sure that actually happens. Thank you. Reactions are also welcome. It doesn't have to be questions only.
Just two things that come to my mind. I thought I'll
Sure.
just put it across. A lot of it impact on the environment that will create, whether it's sustainable. And then I was surprised you never mentioned anything about the Indian political system or the given the kind of growth rates and positives that you're mentioning.
Second one is actually immediate. It was a miss. In my notes, it's there. So when I talk about, so I actually don't have a problem with the political system beyond the problem that anyone else would have. My biggest problem with the political system in the country today is the uncertainty. I actually, unlike, it was fascinating when I saw two elections in the US, two presidential elections, and it's, what I found very impressive was just how clear and stark the positions of the two parties are. I know what they stand for, and then I get to choose. In India, I think everyone stands for the same thing. Parties can change and things won't change. What I don't like is the uncertainty. So for me, it was actually a part of the fourth point that while I use inflation as an example, the political uncertainty does bother me. I honestly don't know whether it will go away or not. So my only hope, or not my only, my biggest hope is that I believe a lot of what has happened in the country in the last 20 years is despite the government, not because of it. I'm hoping that will continue and the spirit of entrepreneurialism will take us forward. To your first point, I think absolutely. It is a serious risk. It's a challenge. My only submission would be it's not a challenge just for India, but for pretty much everywhere else in the world. I would only argue that the challenge is relatively smaller for India, just because consumption, even when it reaches the 2020 levels, will still be significantly lower on a per capita basis than what the rest of the world is seeing. So the collateral damage, so to speak, will be smaller. Having said that, my hope, and it's a hope, and I know that a lot of you here who work in the sustainability space can contribute to that. My hope is that just the way we've leapfrogged in many things, the whole mobile telephony jump that happened, and when India crossed, the number of mobile subscribers in India crossed the number of fixed line subscribers in India faster than pretty much any other country in the world ever. We leapfrogged a generation almost. A lot of people who are using internet for the first time on their smartphone versus having gone through the regular routine with PC and so on. My hope is that we will find a way to leapfrog the sustainability challenge. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll let him know.
I'm sure driving early morning on the road to your native place, you would have seen people holding two things in their hands. One is the water bottle, and at the same time having a cell phone in their hand. Now this is a paradox we are living with. What do you see is going to happen, and what is going to be the role of management consultants in that?
So if you could elaborate a little more.
Well, through the sky, we have reached every nook and corner of India. But the water pipes have not reached. We are still going into the fields. And we are talking about sustainability challenges. What do you think is going to be the scenario in your 30, 35 years' time, which we are talking about, and what could be the role of management consultants in that?
Scenario, to be honest, this one, what will it look like when my son drives down that road? I do believe, and it's both a hope and a belief. So I don't know where to exactly characterize it, because Those are two somewhat, they're not the same thing. But it's both a hope and a belief that we'll actually, what he will see will be a different world, and a world which is a little more balanced in many ways. The role of management consultants, I actually think it's a very powerful role we play. All of us do, and in two ways. The easy answer, but I think an incomplete answer, is the work that we do, let's say, in the social space. All of us have a lot of presence in the space, both with clients as well as otherwise, in trying to look at the social development of the country and try to contribute towards that. But I think to be honest, the bigger way we contribute is by working with our clients in ways that we make their growth more sustainable. I don't believe that sustainability is a luxury anymore. I actually believe it's a necessity. Everything from lowering your cost structure by having a better energy consumption plant to making sure that the wastage is limited because every wastage meant that something was produced which did not get used. I believe it's actually a way of working rather than really an option. Vikram.
Would you like to use the
area, uncertainty area that you're talking about, what's your view on this whole ambiguity one has as an organization? You think you deal with the central government and you get all the permissions, and then you come down to the states. So there's a huge shift the moment you come down to the states and you start from the point of view of establishing yourself. You meet a completely different animal out there. So what's your view on that?
So very short answer is actually that's one of the challenges that I, to be honest, as I admitted, I don't think I understand all the challenges. That is one of them that I don't fully understand because I can't fathom why should that be the case. I'm sure there is a good reason. I'm sure there are reasons why it's so challenging. It's to do with the federal structure that the forefathers of our constitution actually created. The good part in some ways is that if you de-average it, there are some states where it's less of a challenge than others. That keeps changing. Gujarat, is everyone's apple of everyone's eye these days. Bihar, after from living in darkness forever, has been an apple of the industry's eye for quite some time. So the good news is that there are states which are actually more progressive, are thinking of it in a much better way. The bad news is I don't think I fully understand where it's not there, because it is in everyone's interest. It's in the interest of the state as someone who's going to earn money. It's in the interest of and let's between us in this room. There are people who will make money along the way. So
let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So mostly all states, are there with major parties. Yeah. Then some of them are there with regional parties, and that's where most difficulties occur.
Yeah, I'm going to Calcutta tonight.
Okay. So, but what do you do with even these states which are of parties? For example, Kerala is Congress rule, but it's against FDI. Right, which is a policy of the Congress government. So I'm just saying that those are the difficult situations one deals with. So if a single party, a ruling party, cannot really control its own state, you can just imagine the kind of mayhem that happens with the regional parties.
I think it's a part of doing business in India. I believe a part of it is just being at peace, as I said earlier, with some of these dichotomies. It's so logical. It's the right thing to. One hand is saying yes, the other hand is saying no, and you don't get it. So you just focus on the hand that is saying yes. So I think it's just you have to, in some ways, live with it. As in terms of, again, people in this room actually have a fair bit of influence in some of these. I have stood at countless number of forums and talked about, and I do a lot of work in consumer and retail. Done a lot of research, data-backed view on why FDI in retail is good for the country. Not just because it will bring capital, but for a variety of other reasons. Because retail as a sector has the potential. It is one of the most, in my view, most transformative sectors, given the number of people it can employ and the number of people it can feed as producers. To me, if I was a political party, I'd look at that vote bank, I'd say, yes, that's the right thing, let me go after it. So I don't understand why it doesn't happen. Beyond a point, as a practical consultant, I would say, let me work with the people who do understand and make sure that I get the most of the opportunity there for my clients. When people will, the one thing that has, even in a difficult country like ours is true, is when people see success, they also want to follow it. The hope is that when some parts will succeed, others will follow. John.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of the press in driving optimism versus
Are there
You
people?
touched on it, but I personally believe, and I've talked to a number of consultants in the United States, that we have a problem with the press in the United States, that it's overly negative, and it spends a lot of its time beating up on leaders, government, business, whereas the few days I've been here in India, I've noticed your press is critical, but it's not negative. It seems to have a slightly more, I don't know if I'd call it supportive, but it just, the U.S. press has gotten incredibly negative and seems to value negativity and driving down optimism as a way to sell magazines and newspapers. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
So actually, first question, are there people from the media here? Or do I have permission to speak? It was the other way to think about it. No, so I can't, difficult for me to compare between the two countries, but I actually think, to me, in parts, media, I think is playing a fantastic role. It's been kind of almost unshackled in the last 10 years. We see a lot more. There's just a lot more awareness that media is able to drive. And in the US, it's been sophisticated and mature for a very long time. But in India, it's really seen a sea change. I would argue the quality of some of the talk shows can be a lot better. Why it happens the way it does. It's very here and now still. It's very much about just the latest and that day. And maybe that's, my sense is maybe that's because that's the nature of news, that's the nature of media, that it's about the most immediate things. I don't think I hear or see or read enough in the media about the kind of things that we are talking about today. A longer-term view of the world, a longer-term view of life, a longer-term view of the country and for our economy. So I wish there was more of that. In fact, one of my memories of from the media, seeing media in the US at least, was there are very segmented. There are people, there are well-known media personalities, there are well-known shows who actually do a lot of that, who take a slightly longer-term view. Maybe right now, even the long-term is a little negative for the US. I can't blame them for reporting facts in that case, but. I do believe that media has played a huge role in some of the progress that we are talking about here.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay, here we go. Another question I would have is, no, I'm sorry, it fell on my head. Well, okay, another question I would have is, you do a lot about talking about the longer-term view about India. What about a longer-term view of the consulting industry? Have you thought about that? Do you guys talk about that internally?
So the average life of a consultant, I was chatting with someone just before we started, I'm told, and I'm sure some of you have better data on this than I do, is about 2 years, apparently. I have lasted 6 times that. So by a consulting industry standard, I would be considered a veteran in some ways, but I still consider myself very young in the business, very, very young compared to what many of you are and what the industry itself is. So it would be presumptuous on my part, to be honest. And I think Walter is probably the best person to talk about, take a long-term history and a long-term view in the future. The couple of trends that I see, and I see this every day, I see a difference even in the 12 years that I've been in consulting, is just a lot of consulting in the early days, or at least from what I've seen, was about really great thinking. It was about breakthrough thinking, and maybe because there was not enough management thinking at the time, and consultants kind of filled the void in some ways. My experience in the more recent past has been a lot of consulting has been around doing.
Can we just add on to that? Because the difference between employment in consulting and entrepreneurship in consulting. I've spent 27 years as an entrepreneur in consulting. He's spent around 23 years in consulting.
I think so long as we keep on transforming ourselves, that's it. That 2 year, it's a multiple, it can keep on getting multiplied.
Yeah, no,
if we are talking of transforming everybody else, the first thing we need to look inward and transform ourselves, which is what I find a lot of consultants are very rigid about. They don't want to transform themselves, but they are out there to transform everybody else.
No, and there are enough stories. Enough stories. I mean, the most recent being, and there are a lot of people from Deloitte here, but the most recent story being that of Monitor, right? I would consider it a good example of a business model which was fantastic and great for a point of time, but at some point of time gave way.
My personal view of this, speaking to consulting leaders pretty much every day of my life around the world, is that we are a mature industry, and like many mature industries, and we see this whether it's consumer products, retail, electronics, is at this moment there doesn't seem to be the will to transform because we're doing so well. We're making good money, our clients love us. We have a discussion in the association now quite a bit because we're offering a training program in a couple of weeks called Is Your Firm Truly Client-Centric? And I had a huge, long discussion with the gentleman who's running this that I personally believe that's all we are. We're like dogs wagging our tail saying, throw me the ball, throw me the ball. That all we are is about client-centric, and that we've given up a little bit on ourselves to sit and say, you know what, we actually need to spend some time about ourselves and transform ourselves instead of constantly running after the ball that our clients send us, i.e. projects. So one of the things we are, and this is what prompted the question, is with Raj's support, we are going to start in the association a long-term project looking at management consulting in the future, because I believe as a mature industry, we've gotten a little bit stuck. And we've forgotten the things that, first of all, attracted us to consulting, second of all, what made it a great industry and continues. But the fact is, we're doing well even without transforming ourselves. We don't have much of a burning platform right now, although we know perfectly well, as good consultants, that if we took the time to think about this for a little bit, we'd know that there's time to do some transformation and some real innovative thinking about ourselves, our firms, and the industry. So,
at an individual level, transformation is determined by the market forces. And in case you have to survive for long, you have to be very flexible and also keep changing. We talk at the consulting forums, I always say, apply Moore's law to your own consulting practice. Moore's law says every 18 months, the price of the processor goes down by half and the capability doubles. So if we can change our resume every 18 months, only then we can thrive. Otherwise, the date is 2 years, 27 years, and it's still going on. Perhaps I'll die in my boots only.
I think it's a lot about, and I'm hoping that some of the more recent events will, it's difficult to transform just internally. A little bit of crisis always helps. You know, today evening I'll be at IIM Calcutta at a recruiting presentation. I'm fairly certain I'll have a crowd larger than this to speak to. Things are going well, people want to join us, clients are coming. So, you know, it's a little difficult. When things are going well, it's a little difficult to change. And, you know, we tell that to our clients, right? But
we're
I think
also very busy. Yeah. That's the other issue. When you have clients and you have projects, you're so busy. At 11 o'clock at night, the last thing you want to do is sit down and say, what do I have to do to change the firm? Yeah. You want to go to sleep.
I think the advice would be take a trip, take a vacation to your ancestral village. It will hopefully help you think last 10 and next 10 years versus last week and this week. Thank you. Sorry. Do we have time?
We have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for the optimism. Your refreshing look at the gloom and doom which you were saying. So thanks. The question was India focusing on a services-focused economy, whereas China focusing on the manufacture. Where do you see cross-industry interactions happening? Firms from India going out to China and similarly for the Chinese firms. I mean, for example, I would say noodles was something which China had, and now Maggi is almost a staple diet in for us. So something that's an example.
So I think there are several opportunities, and the good thing is, so there are many things that I think define me as an individual. One is optimism. One of them is also I'm a firm believer in market forces. I don't think anyone has to do anything. There is enough good things from China that we need. We will go get them. There are enough good things that we have that China needs, and they'll come to us. And all you have to do is take a flight from India to China, to one of the major cities, and you look at the number of, and these are not people necessarily from large corporations. They are, the SMEs. They are the business people who are actually going. When you see that traffic going up between two countries, you actually realize that it will happen. Those entrepreneurs will actually find that one thing. And so I've heard of, one of my actually cousins went all the way to China. He was making a new home in Delhi. In Delhi, you guys have large homes. In Bombay, we still have to manage. But he was doing a large home up, and he went all the way to China, and he bought a container load of stuff that was then moved back. His entire house is done of, and he personally went, and it was also a part vacation. He went with his wife, they had a good time, they traveled around China, and they on the way back, and he says that the savings that he had on what he got back more than covered for his entire vacation. So, and he's an entrepreneur. He's a self-made man, he's an entrepreneur. So my simple view is market forces will seek themselves out as long as the governments don't come in the way.
So you spoke about cautious optimism amongst the consulting fraternity and a more exuberant optimism in the masses. So I'm guessing part of that optimism is due to, say, entrepreneurs giving birth to new ideas, bridging gaps in the Indian paisa vasool economy. Amongst the established businesses with a certain amount of cost cutting, downsizing, what is the level of optimism do you, in your opinion, in the current established businesses in the Indian economy?
Yeah, I think it's actually it's there. It's very much there. It's interesting, when you read the newspapers, you read about the gloom and doom. There are 3 different projects that I'm running right now in different parts of the country, all in the consumer and retail space. All the clients are making their, as you all will know, this is like for those who follow the financial year, this is the annual planning and budgeting process. No one's talking about a growth less than 20%. Some of them are small companies, some of them are large companies. For an economy that is expected next year to grow at, in the best case scenario, 7%, in the worst case scenario, 5%, no one is talking about a growth less than 20. And this is a budget that they will get paid against. So it's not something that they just randomly put up and hope that it will happen. Most of them are incentivized against it. So I actually think that at least with the large corporations that I work with, I think that it's there. They have the data, they understand it, they see the opportunities, they see the white spaces, and they're going after them.
If we have time for one more question.
I think we're done.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amitabh. Well, clearly, as you can see, from fiction to substantive facts and data. So